Hello there, good afternoon and welcome to Network Africa on Channels Television. Now here are our top stories. The United States maintains that Burundi President Pierre Nkurunziza's decision to run for a third term is a very bad idea, as it could have dire consequences like what we saw yesterday, when at least 3 people lost their lives when protests in the capital, Bujumbura, turned violent. But the incumbent president is beyond pleased to have the backing of the courts, as the Constitutional Court has approved his decision to run for a third term. Under the Constitution, presidents can only be elected to 2 terms in office, but it was argued that his first term does not count, as he was appointed by Parliament. His third term bid has led to more than a week of deadly protests. The decision comes after the court's vice president reportedly fled the country, citing death threats. Decision to seek a third term in office. Civil society groups say at least 12 people have been killed during Burundi's protests, while police put the number at 6, including 3 members of the security forces. Small groups of protesters were back on the streets of Bujumbura today, keeping their distance from police, following what happened yesterday with the deaths of at least 3 people. While tires were smoldered and rocks were strewn over the roads from previous clashes. Police have fired tear gas, water cannon, and say demonstrators. Live rounds have also been used by demonstrators, but, the charge has been denied. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who is in the region for talks, told a news conference in Nairobi on Monday that the decision to seek a third term flies directly in the face of Burundi's constitution. On his part, President Nkurunziza, who is a former Hutu rebel leader, has called the protests an insurrectional movement and warned of tough steps against those behind the demonstrations. We'll take a break now on the program. When we come back, we're looking at more activities concerning the United States, the U.S. Secretary of State, that's John Kerry. That's as regards what he has to say concerning various crises in Africa. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Network Africa on Channels Television. Now, the U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. John Kerry, has been out and about since he left Washington for Kenya on Sunday. The purpose of the visit was to help Kenya in the fight against Al-Shabaab. However, Mr. Kerry made another unannounced visit to the Somali capital, Mogadishu. Here's more on that development.
The U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. John Kerry, has been discussing ways by which the United States could help counter terrorism in Kenya, specifically the threat posed by Al-Shabaab.
I have great respect for what you're trying to do under very, very difficult circumstances. And I came to Nairobi yesterday, and I'm here today, tomorrow, in order to learn more about the difficulties that you're facing, the challenges, and what we can do to try to be helpful.
However, he is also deeply concerned about other crises in neighboring African countries like South Sudan, which has been experiencing a politically based conflict for nearly 2 years now.
Because of civil violence, because of more than 2 million people who have been displaced from their homes, with each day the ranks of the hungry and the malnourished grow, and none of this had to happen. But it did happen because the country's leaders failed to act on behalf of the best interests of their people and their nation. This is not happening except for the absence of the leadership necessary to bring it to a close.
Thousands of people have been killed in South Sudan, and more than 1 million have fled their homes, many ending up in refugee camps in Kenya. But Nairobi is now threatening to shut down a camp housing South Sudanese and more than 500,000 Somali refugees as part of a get-tough response to the killing of 148 people by Somali gunmen at a Kenyan university.
Kenya has a great tradition of hosting refugees, and that the key is to accelerate efforts to have a plan in place for the ability of the people in not just Dadaab, but in all of the refugee camps, to be able to return home in an orderly and voluntary manner with dignity and with safety. That's his goal, that's our goal. And I am confident that the camp at Dadaab will remain open while we work through how people will be able to go home by doing a better job of finishing our task in Somalia, in South Sudan.
During Mr. Kerry's visit to Nairobi, 3 protesters were killed in Burundi's capital as demonstrations against a decision by President Pierre Nkurunziza to seek a 3rd term in office ran into a second week.
We are deeply concerned about President Nkurunziza's decision, which flies directly in the face of the Constitution of his country. And the violence that is expressing the concern of his own citizens about that choice should be listened to and avoided as we go forward in these days.
The unrest in Burundi has plunged the East African nation into its worst political crisis since a conflict that pitted majority Hutus against minority Tutsis ended in 2005, reviving ethnic tensions in a region where other presidents will soon face term limits.